Sometimes life moves, like the surface of a still lake. No sign of a rising wave, no sound strong enough to make you turn your head. And yet, somewhere deep beneath that quiet surface, small movements are unfolding. For Cancer, those movements often begin with emotion. It doesn't take a dramatic event, just an evening alone, sitting in a softly lit room, the clock ticking in the background, and suddenly realizing your heart feels heavy over something that seems so small. Maybe it's rereading an old message and feeling your chest soften. Maybe it's wanting to say something blunt and honest, but choosing instead to listen a little longer. Maybe it's sensing someone's shift in tone before they're even ready to admit it themselves. Cancer is like that. Sensitive, sometimes so sensitive that even you wonder why you care so deeply. But that depth of caring, that's where your quiet strength begins. It creates layers not everyone can access. I used to believe strength came from decisive moves, bold steps taken in broad daylight. Later, I began to understand. For souls carrying Cancer energy, strength is often formed in the stillness of late nights, when you sit with your feelings instead of shrinking them to make others comfortable, when you admit you've been hurt, disappointed, tender, and yet you refuse to let go of your softness. Strange, isn't it? Pain doesn't turn you cold, it makes you deeper, like the ocean after a strong wind. The surface may ripple, but the water beneath remains calm. There are days you feel as though you're carrying too much inside, thinking about this person, worrying about that one, holding unspoken words quietly in your chest. And then, at some point, you begin to ask yourself, where am I in all of this care? The moment you realize you also need tending to is rarely dramatic. It might be a morning when you wake up and simply feel tired of pushing through. You don't want to over-explain anymore. You don't want to keep everyone satisfied. You don't want to carry every emotional weight that isn't yours. So you choose to keep a small space for yourself. And that choice, even if it seems small, feels like gently closing a door so the room can finally stay warm. Cancer is often described as the nurturer, but not enough is said about the journey of learning to nurture yourself, setting boundaries without losing your softness, saying no without drowning in guilt, trusting your intuition even when you can't fully explain it. These lessons don't arrive overnight, and they're woven together from very ordinary, very human moments. Maybe you once thought you were too sensitive, that if you were tougher, less emotional, life would be easier. But over time, you begin to see that your sensitivity is not a burden. It's more like a finely tuned compass. It helps you notice subtle shifts in a relationship's atmosphere, in the rhythm of a conversation, in the silence within yourself. Because of it, you don't just understand others more deeply, you begin to understand yourself. And when you look back, you may realize you've changed, not in a loud or dramatic way, just a little slower to react, a little more steady, a little kinder towards yourself. Things that once kept you awake at night no longer take over your mind. Sorrows that once felt overwhelming now pass like a wave, leaving a trace of moisture that dries in the morning light. If you are a Cancer, you may start to see that your strength doesn't come from fighting your emotions, but from walking beside them. You don't have to become someone else. You don't have to prove anything to the world. Just keep listening to the rhythm of your own heart, like waves touching the shore again and again in the quiet of the night. Trust that each moment, no matter how small, is shaping who you are becoming. And in that stillness, with the porch light casting a thin line of gold into the dark, your story is still being written. Softly, steadily, in the same gentle way you have always moved through this life. After those nights, when you've sat alone with your own thoughts, you may begin to notice something very subtle. Your emotions are not something that need fixing. They're more like a patient teacher, not loud, not commanding, just quietly present, waiting for you to become still enough to listen. Cancer often feels everything before there's time to explain it. A shift in someone's eyes, a slight change in their voice, a silence that lingers a little longer than usual. You sense these things before others even understand what they themselves are feeling. Years ago, you might have thought this was exhausting, because feeling more also means carrying more, carrying someone else's unnamed sadness, carrying unspoken signals no one ever says out loud. There are moments when you've asked yourself, why do I care this much? Well, if only I could be simpler, more carefree, less attuned to every subtle shift in the room. But over time, you begin to see that this depth of caring opens a different kind of awareness. Because of it, you see what lives beneath the words. You feel what hides inside the silence. I once watched someone with strong Cancer energy at a large family gathering. The atmosphere was tense, voices layered over one another, everyone trying to defend their position. This person stayed quiet. They didn't interrupt. They didn't fight to be right. They just listened, eyes gently moving from one face to another. And when the room grew tired from its own repetition, they asked one simple question. Is it possible that each of us is afraid of losing something? The room slowed. No one answered immediately, but something shifted. And the question didn't solve everything. It simply created space, a pause to breathe. And sometimes a pause is enough. That kind of strength isn't dramatic. It doesn't demand recognition. It forms in the moments when you allow yourself to feel, instead of running from what rises inside you. You don't rush to label things right or wrong. You let yourself go deeper into what's happening, like a diver moving patiently toward the ocean floor to understand the current. For Cancer, emotion is not just reaction. It's a map. Each time your chest tightens, each time your heart warms, there is a signal there. And when you learn to trust those signals, you begin to live one beat slower, not to escape life, but to understand it. There may have been days when everything felt overwhelming, emotion stacking on emotion, like waves following waves. Yet in those very days, you may have learned something profound. You learned to sit down, to place a hand on your chest, to ask yourself what you truly need, not what others need from you, not what the world expects from you, but what you, in this moment, need to feel just a little more at peace. Gradually, you realize your emotions are not your enemy. They don't arrive to weaken you. They arrive to remind you of the value of sincerity, of connection, of living honestly with the rhythm inside your own chest. When you feel sad because someone grows distant, it means you once valued that bond. When you feel joy over something small, it means you still know how to be moved by life. And perhaps the greatest lesson this quiet teacher brings is not how to control emotion, but how to stay with it, to sit with sadness without shaming yourself, or to sit with joy without fearing how fragile it might be, to sit with sensitivity without seeing it as a flaw. In the stillness of night, when the world has softened and most sounds have faded, you can hear your inner voice more clearly. It isn't loud. It doesn't rush you. It simply whispers that each time you allow yourself to feel fully, your heart expands a little more. And when the heart expands, the world around you seems to soften too, in a way that's difficult to explain, as if your willingness to listen creates a quiet ripple outward, a circle of calm moving gently through the dark, like waves touching the shore in a long night that hasn't quite ended yet. And then, even after you've grown used to listening to your emotions like a quiet teacher, life still places very human challenges in your hands. There are mornings when the light outside your window is as gentle as ever, and yet your chest feels heavy, as if you've just walked through a long night of rain. There isn't always a clear reason, just a relationship that has shifted, a belief that's been tested, a disappointment that's hard to name, but unmistakably there. With Cancer, pain tends to go deep. It doesn't skim the surface like a scratch on skin. It's more like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples outward, touching old memories, old fears carefully stored away. You may have wondered why a single sentence, a subtle change in tone, or an extended silence affects you so much. But if you look closer, it's not just reaction. It's the honesty of your heart recognizing that something has changed. Strangely, instead of turning cold, you begin to grow gentler, first with yourself. Not because you're fragile, perhaps because you understand that the heart, like the ocean, can be stirred at the surface and still remain deep underneath. The waves may rise, the winds may howl, but the deeper water stays quiet and generous. You begin to see that you don't have to be strong in the way the world often praises. You only need to be honest about what you feel. There are days when you allow yourself to be sad without rushing to deny it. You don't force yourself to be resilient immediately. You sit there, maybe with a cup of tea gone cold, looking out at a pale gray sky, and admitting that you hoped, that you trusted, that you placed your heart somewhere real. That admission doesn't make you smaller. If anything, it feels like laying the first brick of a steadier foundation. The moments of hurt like these quietly begin shaping new boundaries. In the past, you may have given more than you could truly sustain. You opened your heart wide, hoping anyone who stepped inside would honor its warmth. But through experience, you learned to close the door just a little, not to block love, but to protect the light within you. You begin to understand that compassion doesn't mean accepting everything. Understanding doesn't mean abandoning your own feelings. Maybe you once feared that if you set boundaries, people would leave. But over time, you realize relationships built on respect don't disappear simply because you voice your needs. And if someone does step away when you begin loving yourself more, perhaps that carries its own quiet message about alignment. Cancer loves with the whole heart. And when that heart is hurt, only the pain is real. But what sets you apart is that you don't allow pain to turn you into a closed version of yourself. You still believe in connection. You still want to listen. You still allow yourself to be moved by kindness. Only now, you do so with clearer awareness, with a softer kind of self-respect you may not have recognized before. On quiet nights, when old memories return like a slow-moving film, you no longer blame yourself for believing, for loving, for hoping. You understand that every experience, sweet or bittersweet, has deepened your soul, like layers of sediment settling at the ocean floor. They don't disappear. They remain, making the water richer. And as you continue forward, without noise, without the need to prove anything, you carry a new calm within you. Not the calm of someone who has never been hurt, but the calm of someone who has walked through hurt and chosen not to lose their humanity. In that choice, there is a strength uniquely yours, quiet, steady, like a small lamp burning through the long night, so that when morning light touches the window, you know you are still here, whole, in a deeper way than yesterday, and the story of your heart still has more waiting to be heard. After the wounds that taught you about boundaries, you begin to notice a habit that's been with you for a very long time, the habit of putting everyone else's needs first, almost like a reflex. For Cancer, caring doesn't feel learned. It feels instinctive. You see someone sad, and your heart opens automatically. You hear a sigh, and your mind is already searching for a way to make it lighter for them. You're usually the one who remembers birthdays, the small details, the offhand comments others forget they even said. There was a time when you almost lived inside that role, the peacemaker, the listener, the one willing to adjust so everything could stay smooth. You cared, you worried, you thought about everyone else, and sometimes forgot that you also have days when your own heart feels fragile, days when you needed a hug. But instead of asking for one, you looked for a way to make someone else smile. At first, that made you feel useful, valuable. But over the years, there were evenings when you sat down and felt an emptiness you couldn't quite name. Not because you stopped loving, but because you began to wonder, in all the love I give, how much do I keep for myself? And then one day, you felt tired. Not explosively tired, not dramatically, just quietly. Much like a thin layer of fog, settling over things that once felt familiar. You still cared. You still listened. But inside, a small voice began whispering, I need to be listened to too. I need someone to ask if I'm okay. I need to sit still without pretending to be strong. The moment you say, I need some time for myself, may look very small. Maybe it's declining an invitation so you can rest at home. Maybe it's not replying to a message immediately. Maybe it's not over-explaining when someone misunderstands you. But internally, that's a profound shift, like gently closing a door so the room can stay warm, instead of letting cold air rush in just because you're afraid someone might think you're distant. From the outside, nothing looks different. Life goes on. You're still you, still warm, still caring. but inside, something is rearranging itself. You begin asking yourself before you say yes. You check in with your feelings before you agree. You start learning the difference between kindness and over-sacrifice. There may have been a time when you feared that if you weren't always available, people would be disappointed. But eventually, you see that relationships that truly value you don't exist just because you always agree. They exist because you are you, with warmth and with clear boundaries. When you begin respecting your time and your energy, you quietly teach others how to respect you too. Cancer never stops loving. But mature love is different from love without limits. Growth doesn't make you less gentle. It simply gives your gentleness a stronger foundation. You no longer give because you're afraid of losing connection. What you give because you genuinely want to, and because you know you are still full inside. There are nights when you sit alone, not out of sadness, but because you want to be closer to yourself. You listen to your breathing. You notice thoughts that didn't have space during the day. You realize you don't have to be everyone's anchor all the time. Sometimes, standing steady for yourself is enough. And in that quiet shift, you may feel a new kind of energy forming. Not defensive energy, not walls rising, but a gentle self-respect. You're not closing yourself off from the world. You're simply walking slower, more selectively, like water finally finding its shoreline, no longer spilling everywhere without direction. Deep in your heart, you understand that stopping the effort to please everyone isn't selfish. It's how you protect the flame inside you from burning out. And when that flame is kept warm, just enough, you can continue to share your light. Not out of pressure, not out of fear, but because you truly want to, in a rhythm that feels new, quiet, real, as if your story is still unfolding, softly, whispering forward into the night. When you've learned how to keep the fire warm inside your own room, when you're no longer stepping outside just to make everyone comfortable, another awareness begins to surface, slowly, quietly, but clearly. You start to reconsider how you've defined strength. Most people think strength has to be sharp like metal, solid, unshakable, spoken in firm, decisive words, without a single crack showing on the surface. And maybe there was a time you tried to wear that armor. You told yourself you needed fewer emotions, less sensitivity, less reaction, less care. But each time you tried to harden in that way, you felt exhausted, like you were wearing a suit of armor that was never made for you. Heavy, restricting, hard to breathe in. And deep inside, your heart kept beating in its own rhythm, soft, attuned, unwilling to become something else just to be called strong. For Cancer, strength can look like water. Water doesn't compete, but it always finds its path. Water doesn't shout, yet over time, it can smooth stone. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to win every conversation to prove your worth. There is a quiet power in remaining calm when others lose their direction, in choosing understanding instead of instant reaction, so in continuing to believe in goodness even after disappointment. There are moments when you've doubted your own sensitivity. You might have wondered, why did I ever think strength meant never crying, never wavering? Perhaps because the world often celebrates what is visible. Clear achievements, loud declarations, bold displays. Meanwhile, the tears shed at night, the private moments of vulnerability, are treated as something to hide. But when you allow yourself to cry without shame, when you allow yourself to feel sadness without self-judgment, you are practicing a different kind of courage, the courage to be honest, the courage to not run from what you feel, the courage to sit with pain instead of drowning it in noise. Gradually, you begin to understand, softness is not the opposite of stability. It is simply another way to stand steady in the world, like a flexible branch in strong wind. It doesn't fight every gust. It bends, it moves, and when the wind passes, it returns to its place. If that branch were too rigid, it might have snapped long ago. It is flexibility that allows it to endure. You are no different. The times you step back to think are not weakness. The times you choose silence instead of sharp retaliation are not defeat. They are ways of protecting your energy. They are ways of choosing which battles are worthy of your heart. Cancer carries the ability to nurture, not only others, but deeply personal dreams. When you are gentle with yourself, you create a safe space within. In that space, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to compare yourself to anyone. You only have to be honest with your own rhythm. And something interesting happens. When you stop trying to be strong according to someone else's mold, you actually feel steadier, not because you no longer get hurt, but because you know you can move through hurt without losing who you are. You don't have to turn into stone to survive this world. You can be water, deep, enduring, still finding your own way forward. On quiet nights, when you sit and listen to your own inner voice, you may feel a gentle trust beginning to grow. A trust that the way you experience the world is not wrong. A trust that your softness does not need to be corrected. And as that trust quietly spreads, you begin walking differently, lighter, yet more grounded, as if each step carries a full acceptance of who you are. And within that acceptance, a deeper chapter of your inner journey continues to unfold. So not loudly, not dramatically, but like the tide rising and falling within a vast ocean, steady, inevitable, and entirely your own. And then, after everything you've walked through, there comes an evening, an ordinary one. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing extraordinary unfolds. And yet, you suddenly notice you're responding differently to something that once unsettled you. A comment that used to keep you awake at night now brings only a soft smile. A silence that once tightened your chest no longer sends you into panic. A distance that once frightened you is now met with steadier eyes. No more rushing, no more over-explaining, no more blaming yourself for days on end. This shift doesn't arrive with bells ringing to announce your growth. No one stands there handing you a certificate of maturity. Like, it's simply a lighter feeling in your chest, as if something heavy has finally been set down. A deeper breath, when you realize you no longer have to strain to keep everything intact. A calmer gaze, when you understand that not everything that leaves is a loss. Cancer rarely notices how they grow. You don't grade yourself. You don't mark milestones on a chart. You just live. You just feel. You move through each day with sincerity. And yet, when you look back, you see that you've changed in subtle ways. You don't seek validation as much as you once did. You no longer see your sensitivity as weakness. You don't panic when things unfold differently than you imagined. Perhaps the moments you once labeled as weakness, the nights you cried alone, and the times you stayed quiet because you didn't know what to say, were quietly shaping your strength. They taught you about limits. They taught you about self-respect. They taught you that your heart doesn't have to close in order to survive. You begin trusting your own rhythm, not rushing like others, not comparing your path to anyone else's. You understand that some roads were never meant for you, and that doesn't diminish your worth. You understand that some people only stay for a short season, and that doesn't make the love you gave meaningless. In your quiet room, you may have sat for a long time, reflecting on older versions of yourself, the version who feared abandonment, the version who believed you had to do more to be worthy of love, the version who thought that if you were gentle enough, nothing would break. You don't blame them. You hold them in memory, like holding a child who did the best they could with what they knew. And then, you smile, softly. Not because everything is perfect, not because you no longer stumble, but because you realize you've walked through so much and still kept the most important thing, a warm heart. A heart that didn't turn to stone after disappointment. A heart that still responds to late-night lights, to the sound of rain, to a small act of kindness. No recognition required. No grand milestone needed. It's enough to know you've changed. More deeply, more calmly. You're no longer chasing to hold on to everything. You're no longer losing yourself trying to please the world. You stand there, in the middle of a life still in motion, with a softness that has been refined by many storms. And sometimes, that alone is a very unique kind of strength. The strength of someone who knows themselves. The strength of someone who dares to love without abandoning who they are. The strength of someone who keeps walking without needing applause. In that quiet stillness, as night slowly retreats and morning light begins to rise, you may feel something subtle opening ahead. Not a promise, not a prediction. Just a sense that this journey continues. And you, with everything you've lived through, are ready to keep moving forward in your own way, gently, like the tide touching the shore again, and again, and again.